Thanks for listening and enjoy the episode. So, Eileen, welcome to the Wellspring podcast. For everyone listening, I came to meet Eileen Campbell, who we will discover together shortly, through a really interesting way. So I have a small class in the local town that I live in the countryside called Southwell. And one of the ladies who comes said to me at the end of the class, "Oh, have you met Eileen Campbell?" And I said, "Well, no, I haven't." She said, "Oh, I think you'd really like her. She lives locally and she's also goes to work in London and she lives in Southwell and she likes gardening and yoga and she's an author." And I thought, wow, I've got to meet this lady. And so I went home and looked her up on the internet and found her website, which is eileencampbellbooks.com, isn't it?
That's right.
And popped her a message and we met up for a coffee, and I was just so excited to find that just around the corner in this small town that I'd moved to, there was this fabulous lady with all this amazing wealth of experience and all of our shared interests. So I'm really excited to be able to get to know Eileen together here on the podcast. So welcome, Eileen.
Thank you, Emma, and it's really lovely for you to come and talk to me about my life and work.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So where to begin? So there are so many different things I'd love to explore with you, Eileen, but to begin with, I thought maybe we might start by discussing your spiritual journey. Like, how did you start it? Do you remember when you first became interested?
I do, actually, because I was actually very young. I didn't know it was a spiritual journey, but my father was a humanist, and he refused to have us baptised, my sister and I, as children, because he said we should make up our own minds about religion when we were old enough. And but he was a very thoughtful man, and he gave me a copy of Tolstoy's short stories to read. I can't remember how old I was. I think I was actually it was before I went to secondary school. Mm. So I must have been about maybe 10 or 11. And I read those short stories and I was so moved by them. I've got a collection which isn't the original collection I have. I can't find the original book that I had, but I wanted to revisit them. And they are, they're very interesting stories with, real kind of moral fibre and very moving. And that really kind of made me, I was always quite a quiet child and I read a lot, but that really made me think about things. And although I think I had been to Sunday school occasionally, because I think my friends went, and so my parents let me go. But I wanted to start going to church. And we had a lovely church. I was a little bit older then. I had a bit of a peripatetic background in terms of my father was in the RAF, so we travelled around. I lived in North Africa and Cyprus and Germany and various places, but it began to settle down more in England as I became a teenager. So very much wanted to go to church, and I was very lucky because we were living in Buckinghamshire and went to a church in Braddon and Beeches which had a choir, and it was a beautiful sung Eucharist, and obviously I wasn't confirmed, so I didn't take communion, but I used to love to go, and I loved the hymns and the music and the liturgy, and not that I really understood it at all, but anyway, I really got a lot out of that, and thought a lot about what life was. Who are we? Why are we here? Where do we come from? What's life about? And then moving on rather rapidly, my father died when I was 15, and whether it was because the deep shock of that, or whether it was the kindness of a local priest, I decided that I'd become confirmed and baptised and confirmed in that order, obviously.
Yeah.
And I got baptised and confirmed in Canterbury Cathedral. So that was, I obviously did a lot of kind of Christian reading at that stage. But it was the 1960s, and I went up to university, and I'd only ever been at girls' schools. The whole thing, I'd never really done much on my own. I felt a bit lost, to be honest. It was strange going up and meeting all these very, quite middle class. I came from a very working class background, and suddenly mingling with, middle class people with quite, different life experiences. Although it was interesting, it was also sort of, I was very unsure of myself. And so actually it sounds terrible, but I felt, going to church on a Sunday morning was a really weird thing to do, with nobody else doing that and everybody been partying the night before, and it was sort of, fairly wild, etc. So I basically stopped going to church, but I still had this hunger.
Yeah.
And it, basically I started becoming very interested in the metaphysical poets and looking elsewhere. And then more and more, I was immersing myself in, people like T.S. Eliot, and thinking, yes, I some part of me, at some level, understood this. I couldn't necessarily explain it, but I felt this deep sense of meaning that was important to me. Jumping on again, because obviously this takes time. I then joined, when I left university, I thought, well, for all the wrong reasons, I wanted to go into publishing. I thought it would be glamorous and exciting, and it was. In some ways it was later, but initially it was quite, where I joined Routledge, and it was quite Dickensian, very academic. It was hot metal days. It was almost like an apprenticeship.
What's that? Hot metal days?
Hot metal. Well, when the printing was done,
right.
that was how.
Right.
Yes, and you had galley proofs, and
gosh,
yeah. So it was all so different from digital, whatever. But anyway, I had become interested. I'd been reading people like Krishnamurti and all sorts of writers of, obviously Khalil Gibran fell into my hands, all sorts of writers on mysticism and whatever. So going to Routledge was interesting because they had the most amazing backlist, and they had all the psychology, all Jung's books, Joseph Campbell's books on mythology. It was an absolute mine of wonderfully inspiring stuff, which again, a lot of which I didn't understand at the time, but I knew that this was fantastic stuff, and it made me Zimmer had written on India and whatever, and it made me want to go and do that overland trip to India. So
when was this?
This is 1973, when I decided to give up my job, and my then boyfriend and I drove out through Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, in an old we bought it for £270, this Dutch post office van, and it became our home for 18 months. So we painted it pink, maroon and black because we were huge fans of Mark Rothko, and we'd seen his paintings in these slabs of colour, and we felt that that's what we wanted to do. Anyway, there we were, and we set off, and I mean, honestly, completely crazy, really. We had pink carpet, and the very first night when we got to France, there was a storm, and so there was mud all over the pink carpet. Very impractical. Pink only because I think we bought it cheaply. It was an offcut or something. But anyway, it was, we had a bed and we had a little kitchen and whatever. So we travelled and had an amazing, eye-opening, experience. And when I felt, of course, we had no Lonely Planet guides or, there were no travel guides at that stage. So all we had was Ordnance Survey maps, and there was
no mobile phones.
Oh God, no, not in 1973.
No.
Nothing.
You weren't able to Instagram your travels.
Absolutely,
just for you.
No, not. And in fact, I have very few photographs of that period. But I do have some. But what happened was, once we hit Istanbul, we went off with a little Ronioed booklet. There was a wonderful bookshop, alternative bookshop in Camden Town called. Mine's gone a blank now. Compendium.
Oh yeah.
And I bought for £1 a little Ronioed booklet because obviously people were going east and doing it that way. It was just a bit before the magic bus days when this bus went out with taking overlanders. But there was this Ronioed booklet which told you where to stop and suggested places to go. So you went to the pudding shop in Istanbul, and there'd be notices on the wall and people wanting lifts and where to go, and you'd meet fellow travellers. I mean, we camped in the centre of Istanbul. Actually, there was a campsite. Obviously, they had some land. I think it might have been a small hotel or whatever, and they let people like us, motorbikes and old buses and goodness knows what, all converted, and we were all travelling en route to India. They let us camp and charged us, obviously, and so we, and I was completely overcome by Istanbul and the mosques. I loved the fact that Hagia Sophia was once Muslim, then it was Christian, then now it's a museum and you have both symbols and artifacts.
Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Gosh.
You can, I went recently, well, I say recently, a couple of years ago, I went back to Istanbul for the first time for 40 odd years.
Gosh.
And yes, you can, I've taken photographs of the Islamic, symbols, and also you can see the Christian
Wow.
stuff. Yeah.
And where is that again?
That's the Hagia Sophia in
Sophia.
Constantinople, yeah.
Wow, I'll put that on my list.
Yes, you'd love to go. You would love to go, yeah. And then we went to Iran. And Afghanistan was just amazing. Well, all these places were amazing. Yeah. And so I suppose I should gallop on quickly because I know we've got some ground to cover. And so, finally got to India. And very interesting, really, because I was so completely overwhelmed by it. I thought it was such an amazing place. And I suppose it was the colour, the sound, everything about India was just, it spoke to me. And also this sense of the sacred that was there, even though there was appalling poverty. There still is poverty, obviously, but I think things were much worse then. That was overwhelming. The crowds were overwhelming, but at the same time it felt so vibrant. And in a way, my going was a search. It was my own journey, but it was also, I suppose, we were part of something that was happening. There was this kind of rebellion against materialism and consumerism, and we were looking for a different way of life. And somehow India seemed to offer, I'm not saying that one wanted to become Indian, but or to live like that, but it showed us a different way of being. And there were obviously lots of ashrams, not that we spent a lot of time, to be honest, on ashrams or whatever. It was really only when I came back that I decided that I wanted to learn to meditate properly. And so I started with Brian and I, my then boyfriend, started with the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, which is now called something else, but that's how we started, and we learnt to meditate. And then we kind of progressed. I became a devotee of Muktananda whilst he was alive, and then went out to his ashram in Ganeshpuri. Also, I've been to many ashrams now in India, and I've been for meditation, but mostly it's for serious yoga practice. And Swami Rama's I've been to twice up in Rishikesh. That's more recently. So it's been a continuing thing. I mean, it's like this journey never stops. It's like the layers of an onion. You keep peeling back, learning more about yourself, realizing you think you've made a little bit of progress, and then life shows you need to learn yet more. And it is this inner learning, and the thing I realise now as I'm growing older is I realise the journey it's the same journey, but it's a different journey, and it's like the second stage of life journey, which might actually happen when someone's younger, doesn't necessarily happen when you're older, and some people never take that journey. And it's something I have written about. I call it the heroine's journey, but Joseph Campbell, of course, called it the hero's journey. And it's about the fact that we have to step out from our comfort zone. We have to journey. We have to listen to this call, and it's the call of the soul, basically. We need to find the meaning, the purpose, the reason we're here. And they're the very questions that when my father first gave me, the Tolstoy, that made me think, who am I? Where do I come from? How should I live my life? What is the purpose? What is the meaning? And I think unless we ask those questions, we're looking outside all the time, outside ourselves for answers. The answers are all in here. And you know that, I think, from your meditation and yoga, that you can have those moments of real knowing. It only seems to last for a short space of time because we're drawn outwards. That is the human dilemma. We're constantly drawn outwards. And it takes discipline and patience and kindness to yourself to actually go back, and focus inwards and be silent. Because actually, when we're silent, we feel totally in touch with the life force, everything around us. It's interesting, this journey we make.
Oh gosh, yeah. When you were saying that, it reminded me a little bit of that poem from Rilke, Sometimes a Man Stands Up During Supper.
Oh, I don't know that.
I'll have to.
Yes,
Yeah.
because I like Rilke, and
Yeah.
I've got in fact, the portrait, no, not portrait of an artist. What's it called? The letters to an young,
That's it.
yeah.
I'll have to find it for you.
Yeah. Oh,
Sometimes
thank
a man
you.
stands up during supper. It's the call to follow.
Right.
You know, the inner journey. Yeah, it's lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Gosh.
the whole Odysseus thing, you know, his journey to Ithaca and whatever, all that is, I've just been to the Troy exhibition, which was interesting, in the British Museum, and I think the Greek myths, it's all there, you know, this.
That people have been hearing that call for a long, long time in all different eras, and that's so fascinating, and everything that you've just said completely resonates, and it's just so nice to hear you talk about it. It's also so affirming to hear another person talk about something that, you know, where you can recognise a bit of your own experience in it as well. To hear you talking about it from, you know, all your years of practice and experiences is really lovely. I was also hoping to chat over with you some of the hobbies you've got that may have sprung from these practices you've been doing all these years, because you've got a lot of hobbies. Do you call them hobbies or special interests?
Yeah, hobbies and interest, passions.
You've
actually.
got loads of hobbies. What are you on with at the moment then? Shall we have a little? What comes out of your Wellspring?
Yeah. Well, gardening is a great passion.
Yeah.
And that started again very early.
Yeah.
And my father gave me a patch of ground when I was 7, actually,
Wow.
and some packets of seeds, and showed me what to do. And so I grew them. And of course, you know, what a joy, what a delight.
Yeah.
And then, of course, as the years go by and you're living in, you know, I was in Brixton when I first left university, you know, I think I've heard you say that you had window boxes everywhere. I had window boxes on every single windowsill. And I was trying to grow aubergines and peppers and tomatoes and flowers, and so there was that. And then when I bought my first house, I had a greenhouse. Well, I mean, I went mad, you know, with seeds and all the rest of it, and you know, it was incredible. And then I've always gardened since then. I mean, so obviously, you know, many years of gardening. And I remember when I first went to the Chelsea Flower Show, which again must have been in the 1970s, and getting the I went on the day they sell off the plants, and I think it was cheaper, that's why, but I didn't realise they did this. And of course, you know, I went back on the number 2 bus to where I was living in Crystal Palace, I don't know, 2 or 2B, anyway, whatever it is, can't remember now, a long time ago, carrying armfuls of pots that I'd bought for, it was just so wonderful. So, you know, yes, I've always been a keen gardener, and then this is my, you know, absolute passion and my therapy. And actually, I did a book called The Joy of Gardening, and I'm giving a talk actually in April on a passion for gardens. I mean, to me, you know, meditation is one thing, obviously, but actually, I think meditation can also, for people who don't want to sit on a mat and meditate, you know, following your passion is so important, because when I garden, I might be feeling cross about something, or I might, you know, kind of be slightly anxious about something. When I'm out there, all I care about is what I'm doing and what I'm seeing, and, you know, feeling the connection with the plants, and I'm checking everything, you know, how is everything? Is there anything?
Yes.
Is everything okay here? I forget completely. So it's a therapy, gardening, and it makes me very happy. I garden all year round. I'm out there, you know, all through the winter on a good day. I don't think pouring rain or last week's storm I would be out in. But yes, no, I love to be out there. You understand that. So gardening is one thing, and I feel that's also helps my spiritual practice. The other big passion is singing. Yeah. And so I didn't have any musical background in terms of training. I sang in a choir at school, but I couldn't really read music as such, and I never learnt to play a musical instrument. We didn't have any money for that, so I never thought of myself as being a singer. But I loved the folk songs I used to sing with my mother, actually, and I went to the local folk club and whatever, so I used to sing folk songs in the would have been late 60s, and my mother and I were both fans of Joan Baez and Bob Dylan and all those people that were around, so got very caught up in that. But never really was a singer. And it was really only when this is going to sound very strange, over 20 years ago now, when I was on my 50th birthday. I was in East Africa and I got cerebral malaria. And I was very ill, but made a recovery, etc., etc. When I recovered, I thought, this is a bit of a wake-up call. I was at the height of my career, and I thought, I need to think about, there's something not right. My life is out of balance. And so I decided that I wanted to get singing back into my life. Shortly after that came a little bit later. After I returned to work, I was at the office late one night, and one of my editors was there, and I said, what are you doing? It's late for you to be here. She said, it's all right, I'm not working. So I said, what are you doing then? She said, I'm working on the score for Oliver, because we're going to be giving a performance, and we're going to be doing a learning on our own with a DVD, and then we're going to get a weekend coaching by someone who was resting from the Royal Opera House, and then we're going to give a performance. So I started singing Who Will Buy This Beautiful Morning, and she said, you can sing. I said, well, I've always used to love to sing, and I actually remember going to Oliver and I loved it and whatever. So she said, well, would you be interested? I said, God, I would love to, because I said I'd been thinking I wanted to get singing back into my life. So that's what I did, and it was absolutely an amazing experience. So there was me, I was working all week back here, not here, this house, but my old house, and every weekend, some time with the DVD practicing the songs, and then we went and had this intensive weekend, which my God, did I learn. I learned so much from this guy who was coaching us, and it was the most wonderful experience. So then I was browsing, 2 or 3 months later, I was browsing, and I knew there was a choir up here, but I wasn't sure how it operated and whether I'd need to read music. But I saw an ad in an alternative magazine. I can't remember whether it was Kindred Spirit, or I don't think it was actually. One of those alternative magazines anyway. It said, Indian singing lessons, no experience necessary. And I thought, I love Indian music. I would love to learn to sing. So I went along. I rang up and then I went along. And that's how I started. I didn't realise I was learning classical Indian raga, but I went along initially.
Wow.
I studied with Rajaswar Bhattacharya, who's a Bengali, and actually is one of the main exponents of Tagore's songs. Now, I'm a fan of Tagore anyway, Rabindranath Tagore, who is the most amazing Renaissance man, got the Nobel Prize in 1912. Just incredible. I've been up to Shantiniketan, his university up in West Bengal. And so I studied for a long time with Rajaswar, had trips around India, performed in India with him. That's a whole, in fact, I will probably write about it, because I've had some amazing adventures with performances and things and places we went to sing. And gradually, in the beginning, I hadn't a clue what I was doing, but the way it's taught works for somebody like me. I have extraordinarily good hearing. In fact, that was confirmed by an audiologist who said I had the hearing of a 10-year-old, which is highly, highly unusual. He said, even my hearing, is nothing like this. So I've a good ear. So I pick things up very quickly. And the way you learn Indian music is you sit at the feet of the guru, the teacher, and you repeat. And you repeat until you get it right. And this is in front of, you sit in a sort of semicircle. Sometimes there's just been a small number of half a dozen people. Sometimes it's a big room full of 30 people, and you're sitting there and you have to repeat and you have to get it right. And of course, the system of music is different from Western music, because there's all these little microtones and things that come in between. So you need to hear those. And of course, you have to memorize everything.
You need to hear them for a start.
You need to hear them.
Yeah.
And
that's where your hearing would come in.
That's where my
handy.
hearing comes in handy, because I do hear it. And so and again, it's like in a way, it's a spiritual training, because again, you have to really focus, you really concentrate, but then you have to relax to sing. You can't sing.
Yeah.
It's all about breath control.
Yeah.
So that was wonderful. And then I sort of progressed. The Royal Academy of Music did a summer school with Eastern and, well, actually Chinese and Japanese as well. It was sort of an Oriental plus Indian music. So I did Kayal with Rajan and Sajan Mishra, who are, again, very accomplished performers. I actually failed miserably I would say that they're not so used to teaching as they are to performing. And for somebody like me, I was out of my depth. But I love the Kayal. I love music. I now learn Kayal from my Indian teacher, who I studied Tumri with, who I also did Tumri at the Royal Academy of Music summer schools, but unfortunately the funding for those has all dried up. So now we, as students, have to bring the teachers over, which is a bit of a tricky process. And we brought Sinandaji over last year, and she's my teacher at Kayal and Tumri. I also have studied Drupad with Ashoka Dar, who is in Calcutta. So I've sort of got a bit of a grounding in Indian music. But meanwhile, I also joined our local choral society, and I've now ended up as chair. So we're about 85 strong. And I think, there's not many young people, sadly, and this is always a constant dilemma because nobody has the time to give to these concerts and rehearsals and performances. And, I'm sure it will come later in life for people, but it's interesting. Most of us are, I'd say the average age is 70. In our choir, but there's a lot of people sing, and we make a very good sound. We're doing this big Verdi concert in May in the Minster. So,
I bet that's incredible.
It is. It's amazing.
Quite a friend of mine who lives in the city. She just mentioned to me that she's joined the choir. She's in her 30s, and she's got a job in banking.
People. Oh, fabulous!
And she said, I've started going to the choir on Wednesday evenings, and she said, I really love it. She really gets a lot out of it. And I thought, I've never done that.
Come and join us. Come and join us. You don't have to be auditioned.
No.
You can follow a score. We can all sing if we can hear.
That's it. Yeah. Right. Got it.
And we have some people whose hearing's not that great in the choir, but they still manage. We have some very accomplished musicians. I would not call myself an accomplished musician. Right. My voice was, I did have I think probably a very nice voice, but now it's obviously, I'm older. But the thing about Indian singing, I mean, my teacher is really taken on the mantle of Girija Devi, who was like the foremost exponent of Tumri in India and absolutely a legend. Well, she died last year, but she was still performing at 88.
Wow.
Yeah. And actually, Bimson Joshi, I've never heard him. Another Indian, and I'm not even sure what style he was, but he was singing at over 100, performing in concerts. So, it's very interesting. It doesn't happen so much with Western music, but for some reason with Indian music, it's more possible. I think the way the training of the voice.
Yeah, I see, yes. And what does it feel like when you're singing? What's the experience like?
The experience is you do have this strong sense of being dependent on everyone around you. It's a wonderful example of how we all need each other. We need the conductor. I'm just talking rehearsals now, not it's a high when you give the concert, you have the full orchestra, but we practice every Monday night in the State Chamber, which is a fabulous experience in itself. We have a pianist and we have the conductor. Then you're broken down into your various voice sections, and it's amazing how you feel, you feel confident. You've got the score in front of you. You need that. And, if I was audition blind, I wouldn't get it right. Play it, and then I could follow. And I obviously can follow a score to sing because I can see the notes going up and down and the length they are and all the rest of it. But, actually the technicality of it, it's, I don't know. But this sound around you, you are part of. You're linked with these people. You're linked because you're constantly dependent on the conductor. And when you're actually in a concert, you absolutely rely on him totally. Your eyes are glued to him because, it's this dependency. But you're also dependent and linked with everybody. And then you're linked to your surroundings when you're performing in the concert. To sing in the Minster is wonderful. And it's this experience of being whole. And you come out, and the music, of course, is so uplifting. And, of course, it's a vibrational thing. It's an energetic. You're operating on a different level, particularly if you're singing sacred music, which we mostly are. Not always, but a lot of the time we're singing sacred music, and so it's so uplifting. It really raises consciousness, and of course the audience. When you're actually performing in the round, you're a whole. You feel that sense of oneness. What more could you ask for?
What more could you want on a Monday evening?
Well, rehearsals, sort of a bit like that, but it's
that's fantastic.
But you would enjoy it.
Yeah, I think I might do actually. Put another hobby on my list.
Yes.
So I'd love to. There's so many things I'd love to talk about with you. I could talk for hours. But what about your career? How was it? I mean, when I hear you talking so far about your spiritual journey, about the call to the inner work, about the gardening, the choir, and then I also imagine you in New York doing deals and publishing books and you're the first woman on the board of HarperCollins. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I was first woman on the board at that time.
Yeah.
I think there had been Lady Collins, of course.
Yeah.
But this we're now HarperCollins. We were joined
Yes.
with Harper and Row when we had all this merging going on in the 80s and early 90s, and that was the time of these great mergers. So Lady Collins obviously had been a board director of Collins,
of course, yeah.
but the board as it was when I joined it was all men, and I was the only woman, and it was interesting. I suppose I didn't feel hugely confident. I suppose I felt honoured to be part of it and whatever, but there were times when certainly it was very lonely as a woman. And it's interesting to hear people talking about it now. I mean, there was a lot of talk about sport. Obviously, you're sitting at a meeting is a meeting. You get on with the business of the meeting. But in between all that, breaking for coffee or for lunch or whatever, talk was often about sport and male chit-chat. And, I wasn't much good at that. But to be fair, some of the guys there were fantastic. It was quite a tough environment because, of course, we reported ultimately to Rupert Murdoch, and it was a very commercial enterprise. We had a tough chairman, but he was fair. Fortunately, I had a very good financial director. I had a great team of people underneath me, and so when you went into these very tough budget meetings, when you were having to project what your sales were going to be for the following year based on the books that you'd bought, but also based on books you hadn't bought as yet. It wasn't exactly an easy challenge.
No.
And of course you'd always be pushed, because if you'd had a good year, they'd want you to do even better next year.
Yeah.
So of course, it was tough, but I coped. And I think, in fact, I, in a way, was very blessed, because it was almost like the time that I was publishing, the kinds of books I was publishing, and maybe the way I didn't spend a fortune on books. That was one of the secrets of my success. I didn't go mad on deals. I was very fair, but I and in terms of authors' interest, one wanted to be sure that the royalty structure was such that if the book succeeded, then they would win, as it were. But I wouldn't pay a lot of money up front, which was against what the fashion was. The fashion was to pay a huge advance, and then you get all the publicity, and then you get the marketing hype and all that. And I didn't operate like that. But because of that, it meant I always made a profit as a division, and I became something of a golden girl, and kind of almost like legendary in terms of this.
Wow.
And I built up this amazing backlist. I built on the shoulder. We always stand on the shoulders of others, and I inherited a backlist, but then I repackaged it, and I had good marketing people, so they'd say, this is what you should do, Eileen. But I was very lucky. I travelled the world. I was in South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. I was frequently in America, a lot of the time in New York and San Francisco, and it was I was very blessed to be able to meet amazing authors, and also to get some personal benefit from it. In terms of it was a privilege to meet some of these people. It wasn't always easy. But I did have some amazing experiences, and I think, I ended up being, I didn't personally nurture them all, but, I was responsible for, thousands actually in the end of books that have helped change, the whole climate, because it has moved on so much. It comes in waves though, because there was a wave in the 60s, and then it went out of fashion, and then it comes back again, and then it comes back again.
Do you mean like a wave of
interest and fashion, like now you talk about wellness and mindfulness and whatever, but it wasn't talked about in those ways. It was New Age. I wrote the first book on what the New Age was all about back in that was a sort of like the sequel. That was my swan song, Wake Up and Hear the Thunder. But I wrote a book called The Guide to the Aquarian Age, and that was really what the New Age was about. And that's that's what we talked about it, you know.
That was the term.
Yeah, that was the term.
Yeah.
And then it became kind of like, we want to get away from all this sort of woo-woo stuff, you know. And so it was more about, you know, health and well-being and all the rest of it. And now it's like wellness and mindfulness, and it, you know, it'll be something else in the future, I'm sure. So
how interesting. And what did you? So, gosh, where to begin? So, you published some really well-known books: The Course in Miracles, Return to Love.
Yeah,
Marianne Williamson.
Yeah.
Light on Yoga.
Yeah, Iyengar.
Yes, and lots of other books as well.
So many I can hardly remember them now.
Yeah. So did you read? Because you read them all, but
I couldn't read them all. No, you would. That's what I'm saying. That I was very fortunate in that I had a great team of editors and editorial directors.
Yeah.
Of course, I had to. There were some books that I was, you know, pretty passionate about myself, and so, you know, I did read them all. But I'm at that stage, I kind of like was able to read and get the gist of something quite quickly.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that I had absorbed it, but I became a very good judge of what might work and what might not work.
Yeah.
And very often you buy a book based on a proposal.
Right.
And reputation, or you buy what often happens. And in fact, the books you buy in New York are very often they're about to be published by an American publisher, and you buy the UK and Commonwealth rights. So, you know, you weren't necessarily initiated. And the Marianne Williamson I bought, you know, from the New York publisher rather than commission Marianne to do it for me. But often you did. I mean, like the same with Paulo Coelho. I published The Alchemist and all his books actually. But it was published by Harper San Francisco, so I took the rights for that. And
got it.
but there were lots of books obviously I did commission.
Yeah.
And The Course in Miracles, as I've told you, is a sort of an interesting story, which we were chatting about beforehand, where I got to know the people very well, and they trusted me, and they were a foundation, and so I got to publish that. But again, I only did the British Commonwealth rights. They retained the rights to sell in America.
Yeah.
I think that may have changed now, because I think I haven't I'm not up to speed with it now, obviously having been out of the industry for many years now. But yes, so, and that was amazing. We had a launch for that at Westminster Abbey, the Course in Miracles. Yeah.
How amazing!
Yeah, it was incredible. Yeah, and the foundation heads came over, and it was quite something. And I founded the Arcana imprint. This was when I was at Routledge, because actually I had 2 stints at Routledge. I went back after I dropped out, but I'd done other things when I came back from my travels. I didn't want to go back into the rat race, and this is why I know that I was destined to be a publisher and ultimately perhaps a writer, because I didn't want to go back into the rat race. I was absolutely convinced about it, but I got drawn back in. It was like I was doing some free I was actually selling bric-a-brac on the Portobello Road, because well, that's another story, but anyway, I got into that for a while, but there wasn't anything to get my head round, so I kind of like was asked if I'd do some freelance work, so I was doing freelance editing and proofreading.
Freelance bric-a-brac.
no. So the woman who was running the editorial department, I'd been working for her, but I hadn't done, it was probably only about 3 months, but I suppose she'd known me from before as well. And she said, oh, I'd like to take you out to lunch today. I thought, oh, that's unusual. She never takes me, nobody ever takes me out to lunch, you know, blah, blah, blah. It's quite junior then, obviously. And she said, I'm giving him my notice and I'd like to recommend you take over. And I was just, I couldn't believe it. You know, I said, well, why me? She said, because I think you can do it. And of course, that was lucky, because it was such an amazing, and I became editorial manager. And then, of course, I got the opportunity to take hold of the Mind, Body and Spirit books. Now, at that stage, they were quite heavyweight, but I was then able to add to them. And then eventually I launched my own imprint at Routledge called Arcana. And when we launched that, that's when I had the Course in Miracles in the launch. Yeah.
That's so fantastic. And you were, and because I was thinking about what we spoke about just earlier, about you were following your path and reading this Tolstoy and all the things that you were most drawn to. And then working in mainstream publishing. Were you able then to publish topics that, even though there was this wave that you say in zeitgeist towards Mind, Body, Spirit, some of the books you published were still quite out there? would you say? I don't know. Was it out there at the time?
It was extraordinary. There was a market for all sorts of things,
Right.
but there weren't large numbers.
No.
But it was interesting because, we sold all our books in health shops, and we had spinners in there. We had a mail order business. This was obviously that crumbled as the internet and everything came on, but it was extraordinary. And so we had a lot of committed readers. So they might be interested in, when you think what happened, you think back to the sort of the growth of alternative and the kind of humanistic psychology and all that converging with this interest in Eastern religions, and at the same time wanting to rediscover your own roots. Celtic became sort of big, and Arthurian, and so people were pursuing these and all sorts of things, and then everything sort of got mixed up with it. Somehow people, kind of, if you're interested in that, well, you might possibly be interested in astrology. So actually the whole gamut of things was available. But and over time one sold a lot of copies, but it was not a big annual sale for each of these books. But that was why we published. When I first went to Thorson's, which again, I'm jumping around here, but I was headhunted to go to Thorson's, and I took over the Aquarium Press, and I had 3 books that year. That was all I had. So myself and one young guy who's still around, actually, although he's at HarperCollins now, but he and I, within a year, had got a list together of over 70 books. Now, you couldn't do that today. So again, I was very blessed to be able to do this, and there were lots of people around who, were quite prolific. They had an expertise, but it meant you had this huge range, and you crossed a really wide spectrum of interests. And maybe some of the books, with hindsight, were not so great, but there were some absolute classics there, and many, probably still in print. And certainly, I'd say a lot of books are still in print.
Yeah,
extraordinary.
It is really extraordinary. Did you because I know that now you've done self-publishing and conventional publishing for your own books.
Yeah, well, obviously, yes, that's interesting because I started sort of putting books together, and I put it that way because I started with anthologies, which was easy to do when I was working, which is, like the first anthology I did was A Dancing Star, and I'll talk about that in a moment.
Yeah.
But because we were talking about publishing and self-publishing. So I was conventionally published, and then when I retired, I decided that I wanted to work to explain everything that had happened. I really feel, quite passionate about the era that we're living through. We are living in this, era of transformation. The old paradigm, the old worldview that we had hasn't served us well. It has served us well. We've made amazing, inventions and discoveries and progress and all the rest of it. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that worldview, which has dominated for the last 350 years, is now, I think, one of the problems that we have with the times we're living through, and the relationship that we have with each other and in the world at large and with nature. So, we separated. We've come, unlike previous and early generations. That there was a much closer relationship with nature, and that somehow just got. And we're alienated. That there's this separation, and it's all about me, and so there's all this and all our problems. I mean, the world is the world, and there's always been these great dramatic, changes and whatever, and we can't change the world, but we can, I think, have an impact. And I think there's this huge revolution going on. There's all this bad news out there, of things that are going wrong. Okay, the media kind of thrives on bad news, so that's part of the reason. And we also know everything that's going on everywhere now, pretty much. So there's a big difference. But at the same time, I think there's a kind of silent revolution going on that is not something that people shout about. It is this transformation of consciousness, because all our crises I think, whether it's environmental, it's political, you look at what's happening in politics worldwide, you look at, the gulf between rich and poor, which seems to grow vaster. Sure, poverty is, there's kind of like, statistics will show that actually there's less poverty than there used to be worldwide, but at the same time the gulf between rich and poor is enormous, which of course is a problem. If you look back at history, because one of my other great passions is history. I'm involved in the local history society. But surprise, surprise. But you look back in history, and always, when people become restless, and there's unemployment, or there's these great inequalities, then we have problems. But whether it's economic, political, environmental, or it's social breakdown, or whatever it is, all these crises, there's only one crisis underneath it all, and that's the crisis of consciousness. And it's all linked to this paradigm, the way we see the world. But I think that's shifting. I think it's changing. I think, the whole way from but the thing is, we're also impatient. And I think these, it could take us into the astrological ages, if you like, where you talk about these great sweeps where we're moving into the Aquarian age. We're not there yet. We've talked about the dawning of the Aquarian age in the 1960s, Hair and all that musical.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we're still not there yet. And so it takes a long time. And so what you often have is two paradigms coexisting at the same time. And I think there is this real underground revolution. It's a silent revolution. It involves people worldwide, every country, every class, young and old, and there are people who are saying, I want to live differently. And I think there's a lot of evidence that that's happening. And even against the background of all the terrible things that are going on in the world, there is so many good and positive things. So I write about the positive things that are happening. My recent talk I gave was all about the positive things that are happening, and I gave lots of examples. Obviously, I haven't got time to do that here. But I really am an optimist. I do believe the chaos that we're experiencing, we will come out the other side. What we have to do is we have to try and remain grounded and centred whilst everything's swirling around us. Because I think it's causing a lot of pain and depression and anxiety, and there is a lot of stress in the world. But whilst this is all happening, and there's a lot of evidence scientifically to show that out of chaos something new always comes.
Yes.
Prigoghine's perturbation theory, which was an experiment. I'm not a scientist, but an experiment. And when you get that, something comes out of it. And
in your book, Wake Up and Hear the Thunder, which I've read, which is fantastic, and they're all available on your website, aren't they, to buy?
They are, yes. Yeah.
You actually, towards the end, as I was reading it, I was quite surprised, because I read a lot in this genre, and I was so surprised to read a book that included politics, economics, all these worldly things that we can do, practical, real life things, and in your optimistic view for this change. And if I got it right, somewhere towards the end of the book, there are these. You offer your 7 or 8 things that you do to stay grounded. Is that right?
It varies. In fact, when I gave the talk, it was 5 things. You try and cut them down. But yes, it is all about staying. But I think it was 12 originally. In Time to Be, I think. Which was one of my other books. There was 12.
I suppose what I mean is you've identified these things that you do to help you get that groundedness. Because you read the paper. Don't you? You read the paper.
The newspaper?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
You're very much in touch with life.
I think so, yes. I don't think you can bury your head in the sand. I think you have to be aware on as many levels as possible, of what's going on. You can't just withdraw.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, as I grow older, I feel there is a bit of me that wants to withdraw more, because I think you know that there's maybe limited time in this lifetime for your soul work. And therefore, you're not sure that you want to go through some of the lessons that you maybe had to go through this time. But whatever happens, I mean, none of us know whether there is this is how it is, whether the soul does reincarnate. But what I'd like is a good death. And I don't want to have regrets. And I want to do everything that I can to have a peaceful end to my life, however many years I'm going to be given, as it were. So I think it's important. However, I think my own personal belief is that probably, the soul chooses to come in and to the particular lifetime to learn its lessons, and we probably, most likely, that soul continues in some form,
Just thinking about some of your books, because you've written quite a lot of your own books, and I was fascinated to understand more, having edited so many books yourself from all these other voices, how you were able to come to your own voice for writing, or retain your own voice, or if that wasn't even a question.
Actually, that's very perceptive of you, because actually, I'm not even sure now that I've quite found my own voice, because I'm so influenced by people. I mean, yes, it comes out in your own sort of style, I suppose. But I mean, I don't feel there's anything original. And sometimes I think that in what I'm saying, I mean, it's all been said before. I'm saying it in my way. But is it my voice? And it's something that I think is really important. And the writing that I want to do going forward is more about actually trusting. I quote a lot from people, obviously I've read widely, and that's where my publishing, I think, I remember so-and-so saying that, and so I kind of like go and check what was that, and I think, that's
You're so
great.
well informed.
Everyone says, my God, yes, you have a lot of knowledge. Well, knowledge is one thing, but actually it can be a hindrance. And when I write, I find it so difficult. My husband says to me, when I go upstairs, I usually write longhand, which is unusual, I know, these days, but I write longhand in the attic. And then I come down and put it on the computer, and I edit. And it's so hard, because being a publisher and being on the editorial side in publishing, obviously that's my background, it makes it really hard to write, and then I weigh every word, and so I'm very slow. But I still think I'd like to write more creatively, to be honest. And that's my challenge that I'll set myself. I mean, not with any view to being published, but I want to write so that it flows, and that it's not packed full of knowledge that I'm putting on the paper.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, I do try and help people,
and
people have said, I've had amazing letters and emails, about how my books have helped people, and I try to be practical in my latest books, the Book of Joy and the Book of Hope. I have affirmations, I have all sorts of suggestions with lots of stories, and I'm always trying to raise people's spirits, because I know how much pain there is out there, and pain is part of life.
Well, that's something that struck me in your writing, which I absolutely love, by the way. A friend of mine just a friend of mine, they have a family member who's having a really hard time, and she's a retired lady, and they said, I mentioned to them about mindfulness, but I think they just think it's colouring in, it's not going to help them with this really serious thing they're going through, really, really tough time. And I thought, and in that moment I thought, well, I can understand why someone would think that, especially now with the way that everything's mindfulness and meditation is so popular, and it's got colouring in books and all the rest. And then my first thought was, they've got to read Eileen Campbell's books, because somehow it's what's communicated in your writing, I feel, and in your voice is this, how's the way to explain it? That you've got such a depth of understanding and compassion for all the struggles, of being a person, the real life of being a person. It's not just colouring in, it's kind of the whole thing. And I felt that they could read your book and find the right thing. Do you know what I mean?
Well, it's very touching that you say that. I mean, when I put Dancing Star Course, which is 30 years old, I sometimes say if people perhaps don't feel they can tackle the Book of Joy or the Book of Hope, or they're put off by the title if they're in pain or whatever, this came out of my own pain. A Dancing Star. I was devastated when my first husband left me, and it was so incredible that I just couldn't understand it at all, and it caused me such pain. But for years I'd kept a notebook, I still have it, in which I'd written down passages that had inspired me. And I'd started doing that way back, 50 years ago now. And I just put in a notebook. And what I found when I was so low was that I would go and I might only flip through this for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and I would begin to feel better, because what I'd written down was the quotations that inspired me. And so I realised there was something I could do, and I needed to be with uplifting literature. Uplifting music might do it for other people. One of my other great passions is art. So art history. I spend a lot of time going to galleries and whatever. But of course, if you're depressed, it's quite hard to make that effort. But a little book of quotations, and the letters I've had about that, I have people who've said, Eileen, that changed my life. It's helped me so much. Men and women, and people who reorder it, having had it themselves when they were in pain, and they want it for another family member. So I think that's always a great one to start with, because I think too, if people are going through a really hard time, it's quite hard to concentrate. But you can open that. Wherever you open it, it speaks to you.
Yeah.
And these are, when you know that, I think, that you need, maybe you're a bit further on in your pain, and you know that there's something that you can do, because in the end we can't control the circumstances of life, but we can control our thoughts, we can control our emotions. In the end, we always have choice. It doesn't matter how difficult the situation, how impossible. And that's why in the Book of Hope I have so many stories of people who've triumphed over the most terrible adversities, been blown up by bombers and yet doing good work now. Or so many people in history, who have had, Helen Keller, deaf and blind, and yet look what she did. So many people, and this Book of Hope is full of stories of people from all walks of life who've had some devastating experience, and then it's about how they have been determined, over a period of time, they've coped with the damage that's been done, and quite often that might be completely physical damage. I mean, Joni Eareckson Tada, who was a Christian writer, had an accident and became a paraplegic, but she's really famous in the evangelical Christian world for her books and her records and all the rest of it. So, or it may be somebody who's grappled with inner struggles. Mother Teresa is a wonderful example. She had a lot of inner struggles, and we know what she did. So, and of course, that's not to say, but it's just to give examples of people who have had all sorts of adversity. Oprah Winfrey, household name, had the most terrible time of being abused and raped, and got pregnant, I think, at 14, and just awful, and yet look at her, multi-millionaire.
Yeah.
So it's about determination. It's about, we can always choose our what we think. We can be, there's no way in it, we must give way to despair. We have to be positive. We have to, pull ourselves up.
Yeah.
It's not easy, but in the end, there's no point in wallowing in pain and misery and suffering. You have to accept it's part of life. And also, something's happening. You're building up resilience as you work through it. Then actually you have resilience for the next challenge, and life will continue to throw challenges at you. It always does, because the whole point is to learn and to end. What one would love to, what we all want, I think, long term is serenity, peace of mind, and that just sense of being at one with the world. And we don't necessarily know that when we're younger, or when we're very young. We certainly don't probably know it, but I think gradually it's something that we all recognise at different stages in our life, and so most of the problems are in our heads. We cause them for ourselves, because we fight against what's going on rather than accepting it, or saying, right, okay, this is how things are at the moment, but they can be different. They can be better. I can make the best of them. You can do something with a situation. I truly believe it's always possible.
Oh, so amazing. Oh, well, all the books sound like great places for people to begin every single one of your books. Sounds fantastic, and I've read Wake Up and Hear the Thunder. I look forward to reading the Book of Joy and the Book of Hope too. One thing that strikes me, Eileen, is when we first met today, and you said, "Oh, I've got my meditation area there, and I've got my library there, and this and that," and people always say to me, "Oh, I love meditation, but I just haven't got the discipline to do it, or I haven't got the discipline to do my practices and things like that." And so people say that to me often, and people also say, because I've got a lot of hobbies as well, and they say, "You've got a lot of hobbies, you're a very enthusiastic person." And I suppose I have become that way. I don't know if I was always that way or not, but I've become that way. And it seems that there's this connection between having a zest for life, or being excited about things and interested in life, and a sense of well-being. Does that come naturally to you, to have all these exciting hobbies and to have the enthusiasm to go up to your writing area, and write books, and to be in the choir and to do this and to have your... What drives you to do that? Is it natural?
I think it's interesting, isn't it? I guess I've always been curious, and I've always... I can truthfully say that I have never, ever been bored in my life, because life is just so fascinating, and there's always so much to learn.
Yeah.
And I think that's, and you can say it's a sort of, perhaps it's not a good thing, perhaps it's a sort of greed, it's this hunger for experience. But at the same time, yes, obviously, surely it's got to be better for us and our well-being to be enthusiastic, and to want to learn, to realise that life is just so rich in opportunities, and it must be better for us. It's not really a greed, but it's true. I'm nothing's ever black or white, is it? And there maybe is a drive as well. It may be the ego. I mean, but the ego is also necessary.
Yeah.
You have to have that sort of structure before you can transcend. And so all these things, I mean, sometimes I think, oh, for heaven's sake, I get really excited about something, distracted. But what I thought you were going to ask me was, people ask you, and people have asked me too. Well, yes, I'm now at the stage of my life where I have got physical space. I can create a little area, but I think it's in the Book of Joy, and I'm advocating, but recognising not everybody wants to practice meditation, but if you do, and you might actually be quite happy baking bread or playing the piano or whatever it is, but if you do want to have a meditation practice, and it's one thing that I do advocate, because I think, even though I say, well, the gardening is therapy and it's sort of like meditation, it's not quite the same as sitting on a cushion and being there with your thoughts, and yes, it can calm you, etc., but I think it's a good practice, and it stands you in good stead to be able to just sit and it doesn't have to be on a mat, it can be on a chair, but but sit and just do some basic mindfulness of breathing. There's nothing simpler. The breath is always with us, and it's just watching the flow of the breath in and out. Obviously there are lots of other more complicated techniques, which are really only ways to try and stop the mind from darting off, but I think it is good. But I say to people, you may not have any space at all. People I know are living in quite cramped conditions, but you can always have a corner of a room where you maybe have a plant, and you could put a little rock there, or you might just think creatively. How can I transform this little bit of space that I do have? Everybody must have somewhere. It may even be that they have to cover it up the rest of the time, or maybe they have a box. I mean, I'm thinking on my feet now in terms of maybe they have a little box that they open up, and you can carry this little box with you. You could even have a little icon that's meaningful for you, or you can have you could probably have anything. Most things vibrate at some level or another. So I think if you can light a little candle, that's a wonderful thing, because the light always gives hope. We know that, and there are so many rituals associated with light, and it's the darkness, within the darkness, it's that spark of light that gives us hope. There's just so much that, and once you get, what I find is once you get into a habit of doing something, it's quite easy. It's like becomes a way of life. So even if you've just only got your little corner or your little box that you open up, and if you can light a little candle and a little bit of incense, it just gives it. But it's not everybody's thing to do that. Do what feels appropriate, but do try and sit and be quiet and just still for 10 minutes a day. It's not a lot to ask, and just see how. Well, watch your mind and see what it does. But then if you focus on your breathing, and that's the advice I always give people,